They put handcuffs on a 4-star general and laughed. She didn't move, didn't react. Just stood on the side of the road while a man with a badge decided her address was reason enough to treat her like a criminal. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, she'd planned every second of it. The arrest, the holding room, the humiliation, all of it, on purpose. Because the only way to prove what this system did to people was to let it do it to her. But there was one thing no mission briefing had prepared her for. Her son had been here first, same road, same checkpoint, same handcuffs 5 months ago in uniform, and never said a word. She had planned to be arrested. She just hadn't planned for what she would find out after. The phone rang at 6:42 in the morning. Elroy Sims didn't move right away. He was standing at the front window the way he always did, coffee in one hand, watching his son pull out of the driveway, same blue sedan, same backed too fast way Darnell always drove. Same little wave from the window before the car disappeared around the corner. Elroy had watched that same scene maybe 10,000 times. He wasn't worried. He was just watching. The phone rang again. He picked up. "Daddy," Darnell's voice. "Wrong. Too careful. They Kellner took me. Kellner checkpoint. It's the saying I have to." The line went quiet, not dead. Just quiet in a way that meant someone was standing close enough that Darnell, "I'll stop talking." Elsie set his coffee down. "You still there, son?" "Yes, sir." "You do anything wrong?" A pause, long enough to hurt. "No, sir." Elroy stood there for a minute after the call ended. Just stood there, looking at the driveway where the blue sedan had been, thinking about the fact that this was the fourth time. Fourth time in 3 months. Fourth time Darnell had been stopped at that checkpoint on Kellner Avenue. Fourth time he'd called home with that careful voice. Not once had they charged him with anything. Not once had anyone said sorry. Elroy sat down in his chair by the window. The coffee went cold beside him, and he watched the empty driveway and thought about how a man can get so used to something wrong that he stops expecting it to ever be right. 3 miles away, in a dark parking lot behind a closed dry cleaner, Ray Dunbar sat in his personal car and wrote the number 47 in a small notebook. 47 stops, just tonight. He'd been sitting here for 3 hours, watching the checkpoint at the end of Kellner from far enough away that no one would notice him. Far enough to just be another car in a lot, close enough to count. He counted everything these days. Badge numbers, license plates, how long each car was held, which cars got waved through in under 30 seconds, and which ones got pulled to the side, which drivers got asked to step out, which ones didn't. The person was so obvious it would have embarrassed him if it were his department doing this, except it was. He'd filed the first reports months ago. 40 pages, clean. Documented, everything by the book, submitted through proper channels to his direct supervisor, who submitted it to the division head, who apparently used it to line a drawer somewhere, because Dunbar never heard another word about it. So he started doing this instead, sitting in dark parking lots, writing things down. No one could ignore. He didn't know yet that it was already too late to ignore. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. A woman's voice. Steady. Not loud. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud because it had never needed to be. Tonight. Don't interfere. The line went dead. Dunbar stared at the phone. Tonight. As in right now. As in she knew about Kellner. She knew the specific location. She didn't explain who he was or why she was calling. Didn't ask if he was available. Didn't wait for him to confirm. Just told him, don't interfere. He looked back at the checkpoint. Watched another car get waved through without stopping. White sedan. Didn't even slow down properly. Then he looked at his notebook. He wrote 47, 48, 700 miles north in a small apartment kitchens that smelled like old coffee and paperwork. General Naomi Cole stood at the counter and did not sleep. She hadn't slept much in 3 months. The table was covered. Not messy. Naomi didn't do messy, but covered. Maps, incident reports, data pulled from 7 months of checkpoint operations. Statistical breakdowns of traffic stop frequencies, cross-references against neighborhood zip codes. The stack on the left held the complaints. The stack on the right held the official responses to those complaints. The stack on the left was thick. The stack on the right was almost empty. She picked up the photograph from the windowsill, not because she needed to look at it. She'd looked at it so many times she could draw it from memory. Her husband, James. Standing outside in bright afternoon sun, laughing at something off camera. He always laughed at things off camera. Always found some funny that no one else caught. pancreatic cancer, 3 years ago, fast and without mercy. He'd retired from 22 years of service and had exactly 14 months before his body decided it was finished. She set the photograph down. Naomi Cole had been a brigadier general in the United States Marine Corps for 6 years. Before that, she'd been a colonel. Before that, a lieutenant colonel. She had served across this country and made decisions under conditions that would have stopped most people's hearts cold. She was not sentimental, except about James, and except about Elias. Elias, her son, 26 years old, sergeant, a good kid who'd grown into a serious man who called her every Sunday even he had nothing to report, who still laughed at his father's old jokes like hearing them for the first time. She didn't let herself think about Elias right now. She looked at the files instead. 7 months ago, the first complaint had come through official Pentagon channels. A staff sergeant from Hargrove, Georgia, black man 29 years old, stopped at a police checkpoint on his way home from base, in uniform, detained for 2 hours, no charges filed. When he asked why he'd been stopped, the officer told him it was routine. It was not routine. Nothing about it was routine. Then another complaint. Then 3 more, then 7, all from the same, all pointing to the same program, all describing the same experience of being stopped and held and treated like someone who had already done something wrong before a single question was asked. Naomi had requested this assignment herself. Her supervising general had looked at her for a long moment before signing the paperwork. Then he said, "You sure you want to do it this way?" She said yes. He said, "Okay, then don't get arrested." She almost smiled. Almost. She drove into Hargrove at 4 in the afternoon. Regular car. Rental. Nothing notable. Jeans and a gray jacket and no jewelry except a watch. The watch was the only thing that mattered. Standard looking. Not standard. She drove through Delwood first. She always wanted to see a place before she engaged with it. Not from satellite images. Not from reports. With her own eyes. Delwood was the kind of neighborhood that had been beautiful once, and then had been neglected so long that the beauty had gotten buried under decades of deferred maintenance and diverted funding. Old oak trees that nobody planted. They'd just grown there on their own over time. Front porches with people on them. A woman watering flowers in the late afternoon. 2 men outside a barber shop talking about something neither of them seemed to agree on. A church on the corner that must have seated 400 people. A community center with a sign announcing a Friday night dinner. A grocery store that was small but real, not a corner bodega. An actual grocery store with produce in the window, and a handwritten special on yellow paper taped to the door. And every 4 blocks. Every single 4 blocks without exception, a checkpoint sign, blue and white. Official city seal, corridor safety checkpoint. Have your ID ready. 4 blocks, another sign. 4 blocks, another. Naomi drove through the whole neighborhood and counted 9 of them. 9 checkpoints in a community of maybe 12 square miles. She drove out of Delwood toward the Greenway district, the wealthier part of Hargrove. Restaurants with outdoor seats, streets that had been recently repaved. She drove for 20 minutes in every direction. She found 0 checkpoints, not one. She parked outside a gas station and sat quietly for a moment, breathing, because she needed to be calm, and what she'd just seen made her want to be something other than calm, and she couldn't afford that. Not tonight. She had work to do. The Kellner checkpoint went live at 7 p.m. Naomi drove past it first without stopping. 2 patrol cars. 3 officers visible, probably 2 more she couldn't see from the road. A captain's vehicle at the far end, temporary barriers channeling traffic into a single lane. She drove around the block, parked 2 streets over, sat for 20 minutes and watched. Then she drove back to Kellner. She kept the window down before she even reached the barrier. Hands visible on the steering wheel, not because she was nervous, because she wanted every second of this recorded cleanly. That meant behaving exactly like someone who had nothing to hide and everything to document. The officer who approached was young. Maybe early 30s, stocky, short haircut. His nameplate said Rankin. He had the kind of posture that people develop when they've been handed authority, before they've learned what to do with it. The flashlight went straight to her face before he reached the window, not at the license plate, not at the registration sticker. At her face, license registration, not good evening, not ma'am. Just the demand, flat and practiced. Naomi had her license ready, handed it through the window. He looked at it, looked at the address, looked at her, looked at the address again. Delwood. His tone shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Is there a problem with my identification? Naomi asked. Her voice was exactly what she needed it to be. Calm, clear, not combative, precise. Rankin didn't answer. He took her license back to the patrol car. She watched him in the mirror showing it to someone. Then Captain Brian Stoker got out of the command vehicle. Stoker was 47 and carried himself like a man who had made enough decisions over enough years that he'd stopped second-guessing any of them. He walked to the driver's side with his hands loose at his sides. Unhurried, deliberate. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. May I ask why? My identification is valid. Step out now. We're conducting enhanced screening. Naomi didn't move immediately. Not hesitation. She was making sure her next words landed on the record. Enhanced screening requires reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. What is your suspicion, Captain?
Stoker's jaw tightened.
Just slightly. Naomi stepped out slow, both hands visible at all times. I want to note, she said, that this stop appears to be based on my neighborhood of residence rather than in any observed traffic violation. We decide what the basis is, Stoker said. I respectfully decline consent to search my vehicle without probable cause. Rankin stepped closer, too close. The kind of close that isn't about safety. The kind designed to make someone feel small in their own space. Look at this, Rankin said. Not to her, to Stoker, like she wasn't standing right there. Thinks she can just quote law at us. I'm familiar with my Fourth Amendment protections, Naomi said. Same tones, same volume, and I'd like to request a supervisor. I am the supervisor, Stoker said. He looked past her. 3 cars back, a driver had a phone half raised. Recording. Stoker nodded to Rankin. Rankin's hand came around her arm and behind her back and one traction. She felt the pressure. The deliberate extra torque or wrist. Stop resisting, Rankin said. She was not resisting. They both knew it. Every person behind those barriers knew it. I am complying under protest, she said clearly. Slowly. Each word its own sentence. Officer Rankin is applying force during a stop for which no probable cause has been established. The handcuffs went on too tight. She noted that too. Anything funny? Stoker asked, watching her face. Her expression didn't change. No, she said. Nothing funny at all. The back of the patrol car smelled like industrial cleaner and old upholstery. The seat was hard plastic. The divider between her and the front was scratched plexiglass that had been there long enough to fog at the edges. Naomi sat with her back straight, wrists behind her. The cuffs cut slightly into her left hand. She looked out the window, watched Stokes give instructions to 2 more officers, watched them turn away a car with Delwood plates without explanation, watched a silver pickup with Greenway plates get waved through without slowing. She pressed a sequence on the watch face, subtle, just her thumb, 3 taps in a specific order. The signal went out, encrypted, straight to Colonel Diane Osei, who had been waiting for exactly this message for the past 2 hours. The signal said one thing, Phase 1 complete. Detainment confirmed. This was not an accident. This was not wrong place, wrong call time. This was the plan from the beginning. Naomi had volunteered for this assignment, knowing exactly what it required. Sit in the back of a police car in handcuffs and be processed thristum designed to degrade and discourage. Because the only way to document what this system really did to people was to go through it. Not observe it from the outside. Go through it. Feel what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a barrier you hadn't done anything to deserve. She knew what she would find because they'd been gathering data for 7 months. She just needed her presence to be inside that data now. The car pulled away. She watched the checkpoint shrink through the back window. A young woman at the back of the line caught her eye through the glass, phone half raised. Their eyes met for 2 seconds. Naomi didn't nod, didn't signal, nothing to indicate. But she remembered her face. She remembered everyone's face. Hargrove's and Central Police Station was a building from another era that had been retrofitted twice and cleaned never quite enough. The fluorescent lights in the processing room hummed at a frequency that seemed engineered to slowly wear a person down. The smell was disinfectant laid over something older and less identifiable. The booking officer didn't look up when they brought her in. Name: Naomi Cole. Address: she gave the Delwood address she'd registered under 3 weeks ago. He typed, paused, looked at screen, then at her. His tone didn't shift dramatically. Just dropped one register in a way that was deliberate enough to be intentional and subtle enough to be deniable. Delwood, he said. Yes, she said. He went back to typing. Behind her, near the water fountain, Rankin was talking to another officer. She could hear them clearly. Either no one had told them the acoustics were bad or no one cared. "Another one from over there," Rankin was saying. "She give you trouble?" Started quoting law at us before she was even out of the car. A short laugh. Like that was going to help her. Naomi looked straight ahead at the booking camera. She committed both voices to memory, the cadence, the casualness of it, the way contempt sounds when it's been practiced into habit. The mugshot flash was bright. She blinked once, stood still for the second shot. Thumb here. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. The black ink stained her skin. Thought about how many people had stood in this exact spot. How many of them had done nothing to be here. "One phone call," the booking officer said. "Wall phone." She walked to the phone on the wall and dialed a number that was not her lawyer. Not because she didn't have one. She had a very good one. But that call could come later. This call was the one that mattered right now, the line connected. A voice said, "Professionals in non-Haitian, Naomi." Said Sango Sierra 441. 3 seconds of silence. "Confirm, General Cole. Receiving your position. Timer starts now." She hung up, walked back to the booking officer, stood there while he finished entering her information into a system that a team operating 3 levels above his entire department had just been granted quiet access to. He didn't know that. He just handed her a form to sign. She was being escorted to the holding room when she noticed Officer T. Greer. He was at the distance to the left, the processing corridor. 34 years old, kept his workspace in better order than anyone else's in the room. He was handling her transfer paperwork, which was routine. What was not routine was what he did partway through. He wrote something in the corner of her intake form. Small. She caught the format. An internal station complaint code, the kind that activated an automatic timestamp on all materials associated with her processing. The kind that created a record that was harder to alter later. He hadn't been asked to do that. She hadn't asked him to do that. He did it and went back to typing without looking at her. She looked at the number in the corner. Looked at him. He said nothing. Didn't meet her eyes. Some people do the right thing quietly, without announcement, without knowing if it will matter. Because they were raised to keep the record clean and it never occurred to them to do otherwise. Greer was that kind of person. She filed it away and kept walking. The holding room was 8 feet by 12. Metal bench along one wall. The lights never went off completely. The clock on the wall had a second hand that ticked just slightly slower than an actual second. Naomi sat down. She didn't close her eyes right away. She looked at the room first. At the walls, which had been painted a color that might once have been beige and was now the color of something that had given up. At the light. At the clock. Then she closed her eyes, not because she was tired. She was organizing, taking everything she'd seen and heard in the last 3 hours and placing it where it needed to go. Stoker's words at the checkpoint, the pressure on her wrist, the pattern of which cars got stopped and which passed without a second look. Rankin's voice near the water fountain, Greer and the complaint code, the position of the command vehicle, the young woman with the phone at the back of the line, all of it went into the same place she put everything that mattered. The clock on the wall read 17 p.m. She sat in the thin, relentless light and thought about what she hadn't expected. Not the arrest, not the cuffs, not the holding room or the booking officer's deliberate tone drop or Rankin's laugh at the water fountain. What she hadn't expected was the source. She had read the initial complaint report 7 seconds ago. She knew there was someone sits inside the Hargrove department, someone who had seen what was happening and had tried the right way for first. The report had been anonymized before it reached Pentagon channels. She didn't know who it was. Until tonight, the man in the plainclothes jacket who'd stood at the processing window and gone completely still when he saw how she was standing. He'd served. She could see it in him, the way you can only see it in someone who's spent enough years in uniform that it stays in the body long after the uniform comes off. He was the reason this operation existed. He had sent that first report, seen what his own department was doing and refused to pretend he hadn't seen it. And he had no idea she was here because of him. She held that thought for a moment, then set it aside. There was nothing to do with it right now. Right now, the only thing to do was wait. The clocks ticked its slow seconds. She had been waiting her whole career. Waiting in conditions far worse than this for outcomes far less certain. She knew how to make waiting into a discipline, how to keep the mind sharp without letting it spin, how to stay ready without burning through the energy she'd need when ready became required. So she waited. 09 a.m. the door opened. Not Stoker, not Rankin, the man from the processing window. He stepped in, closed the door behind him, stayed near it, which was smart. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and he had the look of someone who had made a decision in the last hour and was not going to reverse it, regardless of what she said. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm the one who sent the report," he said. His voice was low. "The volume you use when you want to be heard by exactly one person, 7 months ago." Naomi said, "I know." He blinked. "You knew it was me? I knew there was someone. Now I know it's you." He processed that. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. More like the particular feeling of a weight you've been carrying so long you stopped noticing it, and then someone acknowledges it exists. "Ray, what Dunbar?" he said. "I know," she said again. "A beat, the USB," he said. "I've been building evidence for 3 months. I have it secured, but is it safe?" she said. He stopped. She watched it happen. The calculation that took less than 2 seconds, but covered a lot of ground. He had been certain. He was suddenly not certain. "I thought it was," he said. She held his gaze steady. Not accusing. Present. He went back through 3 months quickly, methodically, the way people do when they've trained themselves to account for what they've told and to whom. One name kept surfacing. He said it quietly. Not out loud-mouthed. Greer. She looked at him. He nodded once. Slow, she said. "Don't move it. Don't touch it. Stay exactly to where you're supposed to be for the next 2 hours. He looked at her for a moment longer. "You've done this before," he said, not a question. "Go," she said. He went. The clock on the wall read 12:47 a.m. Naomi sat back, let herself breathe once the way she did at the end of a contained situation. Not the controlled breathing of waiting. The other kind. The kind that comes when the thing you planned begins to move. She thought about Elias, say 6 every Sunday, his father's old jokes. She pushed the thought aside, later. Right now there was work. And outside in the parking lot, 3 blocks over, a dark SUV had just turned off its headlights and was sitting still, waiting for the right moment, just like her. 23 minutes later, through the narrow slot of window above the holding room bench, Naomi watched the SUV pull quietly into the station lot. No lights when it was announcement. Just a vehicle arriving in the dark exactly when it was supposed to. She sat back down, folded her hands. Gerald Shaw had stood at a window and looked at her like a problem to be managed. Brian Stoker had put handcuffs on her like something to be contained. Pete Rankin had laughed at the water fountain. None of them knew what they had walked into. None of them understood yet that the woman sitting in this holding room with her backs straight and her hands folded was not the beginning of their problem. She was the end of it. She looked at her watch one last time. Then she waited for the door to open. Because it was going to open, and when it did, the next part of the work would begin. And Naomi Cole had not in 30 years failed to do her work when the moment arrived. She was not going to start tonight. The SUV sat in the parking lot for 9 minutes before anyone got out. Naomi knew because she was watching the slice of parking lot visible through the narrow window above the holding room bench. 9 minutes was deliberate, not hesitation. She didn't hesitate. 9 minutes meant she was reading the building first. Getting a sense of who was where before she when he walked into anything smart, always had been. The side door opened at 1:03 a.m., not the main entrance. The side door that required a badge or someone on the inside to buzz you through. Someone had done that. Naomi would find out later it was Greer, and she would not be surprised. She heard OC's voice in the corridor before she saw her. Not the words, just the register. Calm and unhurried and carrying the specific quality of a person who does not need to perform authority because they have simply had it too long to remember performing it. The holding room door opened 4 minutes after that. OC stepped in. 46 years old, civilian clothes, dark jacket, no insignia, single chig over one shoulder and a folder under her arm. She looked at Naomi the way people look at someone they have known through hard things, taking inventory, making sure. Neither of them spoke for 3 full seconds. Then OC said, "You look terrible." "The lighting is unflattering," Naomi said. "I'm getting you out of this room." "Not yet." OC stopped, tilted her head slightly. "I need 20 more minutes in here," Naomi said. "There's a conversation I need Stoker to try to have first. If we pull me out now, he won't try it, and I want him on record trying it." Osi looked at her for a moment. Then she set the folder on the bench beside Naomi, turned around, and left without another word. That was one of the things Naomi had always valued about Diane Osi. She didn't need things explained twice. She understood that the person in the room frequently had information, the person outside the room didn't, and she adjusted accordingly. Naomi opened the folder. Inside was a single printed page, confirmation that the recording captured by her watch had uploaded successfully to secure servers. Every word from the checkpoint, the booking room, Rankin's voice near the water fountain, the handcuff application, all of it. She closed the folder, set it beside her, and waited for Stoker. He came in at 1:19 a.m. She had known he would come back. Men like Stoker always came back. They always had one more version of the conversation in which they came out ahead. It was not arrogance exactly. It was the accumulated habit of being right often enough in small rooms that the habit persisted even when the circumstances had fundamentally changed. He sat across from her, put a single sheet of paper on the bench between them. She could read the key words from where she sat without leaning forward. Misdemeanor, obstruction, plea acknowledgement, sign here and you're processed out before morning. He waited for her to look at the form. She looked at him instead. I'd like my attorney present before I sign anything, she said. It's a misdemeanor charge, he said. Sign it, and this is done. I'd like my attorney present. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, calculated. The posture of someone who had applied pressure in rooms like this, enough times exactly how much and from which angle. You seem like an intelligent woman, he said. Intelligent people don't make a difficult situation more difficult than it has to be. I invoke my right to counsel, she said. That ends this conversation. He held her gaze. She didn't look away. He knew the rule. The moment a detainee invoked the right to counsel, questioning had to stop. Full stop. Every word after that was a procedural violation and a liability. He knew it as well as she did, and the fact that he was still sitting there told her what she already suspected. That in this station, under this program, certain rules had stopped feeling like rules a long time ago. They had become suggestions, guidelines, things that applied when someone was watching. She watched him make the calculation, watched him decide it wasn't worth it tonight. He picked up the form, stood. We'll revisit in the morning, he said. With my attorney present, she said. He left. She sat for exactly 4 more minutes, counted since them on the slow-ticking clock. Then she knocked on the door. Time to get off this bench. The room they gave her was a second-floor conference room. Small, one window facing the parking lot. A table that had absorbed decades of difficult conversations and showed it. 4 chairs pushed in unevenly. Osi had set up a laptop at one end. Dunbar was already there when they walked in. He was sitting with his jacket still on and a notebook open in front of him, and the expression of a man who had been running on insufficient sleep for too long and was beginning to feel it in his bones. He looked at Naomi when she came through the door. She looked back. The USB, she said. Where is it? My car, to console. Locked. Get it. Was up before she finished the sentence. Back under 3 minutes, standard looking. He set it on the table so she connected it to the laptop. The 3 of them watched the screen. The loading bar started moving. Stop. Then the screen threw a red warning that Naomi had not wanted to see. Malware detected. Data integrity compromised, needing quarantine. Nobody spoke for 5 full seconds. Osi's hands moved across the keyboard, pulling up diagnostics, reading code. Her face didn't change. It never changed when she was working. It was one of the things that made her very good at what she did and occasionally unnerving to be around. Someone got to it, she said. Flat factual. Those Dunbar's jaw tightened. That's not possible. I'm the only one who... He stopped himself. Not the only one. He'd told one person the dust drive was in the car. Because the battery had died and he'd needed someone to move the vehicle while he handled something inside the building. He'd handed over the keys without thinking twice about it, because he'd had no reason to think about it. Greer, he said. Not an accusation. A conclusion. The specific way a name sounds when everything reorganizes itself around it and you can't unhear the reorganization. Naomi looked at him. You told Greer about the drive? I didn't tell him what was on it. He just knew I kept a drive in the car. He moved the car 2 days ago. I gave him the keys for maybe 40 minutes. When exactly? Wednesday afternoon. Around 3. Osi kept working. Quapas in the way that left no room for a reaction. How much? Naomi asked. 45% gone, O.C. said. Wiped clean. The remaining 55% is intact but isolated in quarantine. Naomi sat down. Dunbar put both hands flat on the table, steadying himself on some. I'm sorry, he said. I should have. Don't, Naomi said, not harsh. Just direct. The kind of direct that saves time. 55% is what we have. We work with what we have. She looked at Osei's. What's in the intact portion? 3 months of checkpoint logs, stop frequencies, badge assignments, timestamps. Osei scrolled steadily. 63 internal communications, partial threads, but readable. Enough to establish context. Pattern evidence, Naomi said. Enough to open an investigation, Osei said. Not enough to close one without corroboration. Naomi nodded. She had navigated that gap before. The gap between enough to start and enough to finish was where most of the actual work happened, and she knew what that work looked like. Then we find the rest another way, she said. In the morning, Dunbar excused himself at 2:10 to get coffee from the machine down the hall. He came back with 3 cups without being asked. The coffee had been sitting in that machine since the previous shift and tasted like it had. Naomi took hers, held it, didn't drink it. Tell me about Greer, she said. Dunbar thought about this with the deliberateness of someone who had learned that imprecision about people in his department had cost him before. 6 years at this station. Handles administrative processing. Keeps better records than anyone else in the building by a significant margin. A pause. I don't think he understood what was on the drive. Do you think he's working with Shaw? No. Fast. Certain, I think someone saw me give him the keys and told him to park the car in a specific location, and he did it because he was asked and had no reason to question it. He paused. Greer does what he's asked by people he has no reason to distrust. He doesn't always know what he's being asked to do. Naomi considered this, or, she said, he printed it first. Dunbar looked at her. She waited. He thought about Greer, the organized desk, the careful paperwork, the complaint code written in the corner of her intake form without instruction. The man who had worked in this building for 6 years had kept better records than anyone, not because he was told to, but because he apparently could not make himself do otherwise. He might have, Dunbar said slowly. He doesn't trust digital systems. He said that before, more than once. He thinks anything that matters should exist somewhere that can't be deleted. So he might have a paper copy. He might have everything that was on that drive. Then first thing in the morning we talk to Greer, she said. Before his shift starts if possible. Dunbar nodded. Oaksey had been quiet through all of it. She looked up now. While you were in the holding room, pulled public records on the corridor safety ordinance. She introduced it to CTC 7 months ago, past 4-2. Who voted against? Naomi asked. Councilwomen Patricia Reeves and Joan Huff. Both represent Delwood District constituents. Both have been publicly criticized by Shawsha in the months since for what he called undermining public safety initiatives. Dunbar exhaled slowly through his nose. Of course they have. So he pulled up another window. A map overlay appeared on the C-screen. Checkpoint location in Hargrove, and underneath them, in a different color, a second data set. What am I looking at? Naomi asked. Proposed development zones, Osei said. Filed 18 months ago with the City Planning Office by an entity called Hargrove Capital Group. Private development firm. The proposal covers approximately 40% of current Delwood by land area. Mixed-use residential and commercial construction. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something clicks into place that changes the shape of everything. Naomi looked at the map. 9 checkpoints at every access point between Delwood and the rest of Hargrove. A development proposal covering 40% of Delwood's land. A councilman who had designed the checkpoint program and then attacked the people who opposed it. This was not a safety program. It had never been a safety program. The development proposal was filed 18 months ago, Naomi said. Yes. The ordinance passed 7 months ago. Yes. So someone spent 11 months laying groundwork before the ordinance went to a single vote. That's what the dates show. Naomi looked at the map for another moment. Then she closed the laptop gently and sat back in her chair. We present what we have tonight, she said. Whatever's on the intact portion of the drive, the public records, the map overlay. We get Shaw and Stoker in a room and we show them the shape of what we know. Not everything. The shape. And the parts we're missing? Dunbar asked. We find them in the morning, she said, with Greer. Gerald Shaw arrived at Hargrove Central at 2:43 a.m. in a suit that was still pressed. That was the thing Naomi noticed at first and noted carefully. Nearly 3 in the morning and the man's suit looked like he'd put it on an hour ago. Some people's armor was fabric. Some people's composure was structural, built into the clothes. His attorney came in 2 steps behind him. Douglas Fane, 55, gray at the temples. The particular kind of unhurried that very expensive lawyers develop and then deploy strategically. He carried a briefcase and wore the expression of a man who had been in rooms like this before and had left most of them satisfied. Dunbar saw Fane come through the door and went completely still. Naomi saw it. She filed it. She would come back to it. They were brought to the conference room. Shaw sat at one end of the table with Fane beside him. Stoker came in and took a seat that was close but not beside them. Not far enough to signal distance. Not close enough to signal alliance. The specific middle ground of a man who wasn't sure yet which way things were going to fall. Naomi stood at the front of the room. No presentation, no slides, no prepared remarks on paper. She just talked. 7 months ago, she said, the corridor safety ordinance went into effect in Hargrove. In those 7 months, this department conducted 1,143 checkpoint stops on the 5 access routes between the Delwood neighborhood and the rest of the city. She looked at Shaw. 89% of those stops involved drivers with Delwood residential addresses. Shaw's expression stayed arranged. Fane's pen stopped moving. 86% of those stops resulted in no arrest, no citation, and no documented violation. The drivers were stopped, held for an average of 22 minutes, and released. No explanation given. She looked at Stoker. The data I'm referencing comes from this department's own internal checkpoint logs. Stoker looked at the table. The stop pattern cannot be explained by traffic volume data, crime statistics, or any operational rationale. She paused. It can be explained by the fact that every checkpoint in this program sits at an access point between Delwood and the rest of Hargrove, and that Hargrove Capital Group filed a development proposal covering 40% of Delwood's land area 11 months before this ordinance was introduced. The room stayed quiet. Shaw leaned forward, measured. The posture of a man who had been in difficult rooms and knew how to regulate his temperature in them. He started. I'm not finished, she said. He stopped. I drove through Delwood yesterday afternoon. I counted 9 checkpoints. I then drove through the Greenway district for 20 minutes. She held his gaze. I found 0. Fane's voice came in smooth and practiced. This data was obtained through methodology with compromised chain of custody. The electronic evidence presented cannot be authenticated because the checkpoint logs are filed monthly with the city clerk's office as public record, Naomi said. I didn't need the USB for the logs. Fane's mouth closed. The development proposal is public record. The ordinance vote is public record. The 47 complaint forms filed by Delwood residents, all of which were marked resolved without investigation, are part of this department's official filing system. She looked at Shaw. I'm not presenting a theory. I'm presenting 7 months of documented fact. Shaw was quiet for a moment, then very carefully. What happened tonight was a misunderstanding. I was stopped at a lawful. You were not stopped tonight, Naomi said. I was. A beat. I was stopped at a lawful checkpoint, she continued, and then detained, handcuffed, and processed on the basis of my residential address. Officer Rankin's own radio call, recorded by this department's dispatch system, notes my Delwood address, the reason for secondary screening. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Shaw looked at Fane. Fane looked at Dunbar. And something moved across Fane's face that Naomi caught and held onto. Not surprise, recognition. The way you look at someone whose file you have read, whose history you know, whose pressure points you have cataloged. She let it go for now. She would come back to it. She caught Dunbar alone in the hallway at 3:18 a.m. He was standing near the water fountain with his coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it and staring at the middle distance, the way people stare when their mind is working hard on something they haven't said out loud yet. Fane, she said. His expression went careful, deliberately neutral in a way that told her the neutrality was effortful. She said. He looked down the hall in both directions, then back at her. 3 years ago, I filed an internal complaint. Falsified overtime records. Systematic. Going back 2 years. I documented everything and submitted it through proper channels all the way up to the division head. A pause. The complaint got turned back on me. I was written up for improper record access. There was a disciplinary hearing, and Fain represented you. The department assigned him to represent me. Standard procedure when an officer faces internal discipline. He had access to everything, every document I'd gathered, every procedure I'd followed correctly, and every one I'd cut a corner on. His jaw tightened. He got the disciplinary charge reduced. I thought he'd been on my side. And tonight, he walked in on Shaw's side. If he gives Shaw everything he knows about how I build a case, he already has, she said. That's why the USB was targeted. Someone knew what you were building and knew enough about your methods to know where to look. Dunbar stared at the wall. The complaint 3 years ago, he said slowly. The one that got buried. The division head who buried it. Who is he? Retired now, but he and Shaw have been Republican-connected. They go back 20 years at least. Served on the same city committee in the 90s. Naomi thought about that. Fain was never on your side, she said. He was managing the situation 3 years ago, making sure you didn't push further. A reduced charge was the cost of getting you to stop. Dunbar was quiet for a moment. So everything I told him, he said. Everything you told him, Shaw has known. Which means what thou don't know is only what you've done in the last 3 years without telling anyone. The logs, he said. The independent documentation. That's what they were trying to destroy with the USB. He looked at the floor, thinking through 3 years of careful work and where it was now exposed and where it wasn't. What do we do? He said. You need to write down everything you remember from that drive, she said. Tonight. Every figure, every communications, your guess, as evidence, it can't be corrupted remotely. She paused. Tomorrow morning, we talk to Greer before anyone else does. He nodded slowly. She started to walk back toward the conference room. General. She stopped. The way Fain looked at me when he walked in, Dunbar said, like he was adding up numbers. Yes, he's gonna come at me in that room. Yes, she said, he is it, and when he does, you tell him steadily. You tell the truth. Every procedural corner you've ever cut, every time you bent a rule, don't make him find it. You put it on the table yourself. She paused. And then you put the data on the table next to it. Because the data doesn't have a history. The data doesn't have a disciplinary file. The data is just numbers. And those numbers say what they say, regardless of who collected them. Dunbar absorbed this. That's a harder thing to do than it sounds, he said. Most true things are, she said. Get some sleep. 2 hours minimum. You're not useful to anyone running on fumes, and I need you useful tomorrow. He almost said something else, decided against it, went to find somewhere to sleep. Naomi went back to the conference room. Shaw was still there. Fain had stepped out to make calls. Stoker had been moved to a separate room at OC's quiet request 40 minutes ago, which meant OC is managing the building while Naomi yoshed the hallway, which was exactly the kind of coordination that required no discussion between them, because they had done it before. Shaw sat alone at the end of the table. He looked at the window, at the parking lot below, at whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes. Nasi sat down across from him, not at the far end, close enough to have a conversation without performing one. He looked at her. I want you to understand something, he said. She waited. This program was not designed to harm people. She said nothing. I represent constituents who had real concerns, business owners. Long-term residents of other neighborhoods who had experienced property crime increases and wanted visible action from the city. A pause. The checkpoint program was a response to legitimate pressure. The crime statistics for Delwood don't support checkpoint placement, she said. The department's own data shows that checkpoint locations correlate with residential demographics, not with incident rates. He didn't argue that, which was more telling than if he had. What do you want? He said. The framing dropped away, just the direct question underneath it. The truth about who designed this program and why. He was quiet. And if the truth involves more than what you have right now, then I want the complete version. He looked at the table, at the ring on his right hand, back at her. I didn't start this wanting to hurt anyone, he said. I want you to know that, whether you believe it or not. She looked at him for a moment. I believe you believe it, she said. That doesn't change what happened to the people who were stopped at those checkpoints. He was quiet again. Longer this time. The silence of someone not composing a response but making a decision. There are people connected to this that you haven't found yet, he said. She kept her face steady. I'm listening, not tonight. He stood.
Speak my range.
He walked to the door, stopped. Without turning around, he said, "You're not what I expected." She said, "No one ever is." He walked out. Naomi sat alone in the conference room. The light hummed above her. The analog clock on the wall ran at exactly the right speed, which she noticed because the one in a holding room hadn't. 27 a.m. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the photograph of James, not to look at it, just to hold it for a moment. The paper had gone soft at the edges from being taken out of pockets and put back over 3 years. He would have had something to say about tonight. He always did. Some observation that was sideways enough to be funny and precise enough to be true. She could almost hear the shape of it without being able to fill in the words. She put the photograph back, picked up her phone, and saw the message. Unknown number. Received at 4:19 a.m. while she'd been sitting across from Shaw. 2 words. Elias. Checkpoint. She read sheet twice. Set the phone face down on the table. Set it very still. Elias, son, 26, called her every Sunday. Laughed at his father's old jokes like they were new. Currently stationed 180 miles from Hargrove, which was not far. Which was close enough to drive through Hargrove on a weekend if you were coming north to visit. Which was close enough to come through Kellner Avenue if you took the faster route. She ran the math she didn't want to run. 5 months ago. The checkpoint data showed highest weekend activity starting 8 months ago and intensifying around 5 months back. If Elias had driven up on a weekend, if he'd come through Hargrove, if he'd been in uniform because he'd come straight from base. She sat with it for a long time. She could not afford to make assumptions. The message might be information. It might be an attempt to destabilize her. She could not know which until she had more than 2 words. What she could do right now was nothing. Because anything she did right now would be active and reactive at 4:30 in the morning was not useful. She would call Elias after Greer, after they had secured what they needed, and she had all of herself available for whatever he was going to say. Because whatever he said was going to require all of her. She knew that before she knew anything else. She turned the phone back over, opened the development proposal for Hargrove Capital Group, and started reading it from the beginning. All 42 pages, looking for names, for structure, for the architecture of something larger than a councilman who came to a police station at midnight because he was nervous about one woman in a holding room. Shaw had said there were people she hadn't found yet. She was going to find them. Greer arrived at 7:55 a.m., 5 minutes before his shift, which was, she had already learned, simply how he operated. Dunbar had positioned himself in the parking lot without being told to, and walked in beside Greer without making it look like he'd been waiting. By the time they reached the second floor, O'Case had coffee ready, and the conference room door was open. Greer came in, set his bag down, looked at Naomi, looked at the laptop on the table. He looked at it for a moment the longer he looked at anything else. "The drive didn't work," he said, not at questions. Dunbar said. Greer nodded once, slowly, not guilty, not relieved, processing. "I know what happened," he said. "I know how. I didn't know it was going to happen when I moved the car." He looked at Dunbar directly. "I'm sorry. We need to know if you've printed anything from it," Naomi said. Greer looked at her. Long enough to take in the full picture of who he was talking to, the posture, the certainty, the 4 hours of sleep worn without an apology or comment. "I print everything that matters," he said. "I have for 6 years. I don't trust systems I can't touch." "The checkpoint logs," she said. "All 7 months. I'll print the logs every 2 weeks," he said. "Have done for the past 3 months. Since I started noticing the pattern and wanted to make sure there was a record somewhere that couldn't be touched remotely." A pause. "They're at my house." Nobody spoke. "Can you get them?" Naomi asked. He looked at her, looked at the window, looked at whatever he was weighing behind his eyes. Then he said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that for 3 months. He picked up his bag, turned around, walked back out the door. He was back in 38 minutes with a box, brown cardboard, organized inside by date, stacks of 2 weeks each, paper clipped and labeled in the same careful handwriting that appeared on everything he touched. He set it on the table. 7 months of checkpoint stops, he said. Demographics, badge number, stop duration, outcome, every field the system captures. He paused. All of it. Dunbar looked at the box, looked at Naomi. She looked at the box too, at the weight of it. 3 months of one person doing the quiet right thing inside a building that was doing the wrong thing, keeping a record because he could not make himself not keep one. Thank you, she said to Greer. He sat down, pulled the first stack toward him, picked up a pencil, and started helping suss through it without being asked. Outside, the morning had come in full and bright over Hargrove. Somewhere in Delwood, Elroy Sims was probably on his porch watching the street. Stoker was probably sitting somewhere running numbers on how far he was from where things were going. Shaw was probably on the phone with Fane, and in a second-floor conference room with a box of printed logs and four people who each knew a different part of the same story, the work that would determine what happened next was finally, fully underway. Naomi pulled the first stack toward her. She began to read. The call to Elias went through on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, already waiting for something, even if he didn't know exactly what. Naomi stood at the window of the second-floor conference room whilst Osi and Greer worked through the paper stacks behind her. The morning had come in gray and then bright over Hargrove. The parking lot below was filling up with the ordinary traffic of a station starting its day. An officer she didn't recognize walked to his car with coffee. A delivery truck idled at the side entrance. Everything looked like what it wasn't. She listened to the line connect. Mom, just that. Her name in his mouth. And already she heard it. The careful way he said it. The specific kind of careful that people use when they have been holding to something for a long time and are standing at the edge of putting it down. Elias, she said. Silence. Not empty silence. The silence of someone deciding where to start. She waited. She led Brent had the mirta bait the poorest way. Those things most worth knowing get learned, and she applied it now without thinking about applying it. 5 months ago, he said. She closed her eyes. I was driving up to see you. I had the weekend. I came through Hargrove because it was the faster route, and I didn't think. He stopped. Started again. I was in uniform, Mom, full uniform. I'd come straight from base. Kellner checkpoint, she said. A pause. Yeah, how long did they hold you? 4 hours and about 20 minutes. She did the math without wanting to. 4 hours in a car on the side of a road, in uniform. In a country he had signed papers to serve and continued to serve every day without complaint. 4 hours with no phone call allowed, which she knew because he had not called her, and he always called her when something happened. They didn't let you make a call, she said. No. Did they give you a reason for the stop? Routine check. His voice went flat on those 2 words. The flatness of a phrase repeated enough times to lose all meaning, except the meaning underneath it, which was that it meant nothing at all. That's what the officer said. And when they released you, go ahead, sir, have a good night. Another pause. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Naomi pressed her palm flat against the window glass. The glass was cool. She focused on the temperature under her hand, the specific physical fact of it. Why didn't you report it? She asked, keeping her voice the way she kept it in difficult conversations. Level, present. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, you know why. She did know. She had known before she asked, but she needed him to say it. Because I knew you would do exactly what you're doing right now, he said. And I didn't want to buy the reason you took that on. I've watched you take things on my whole life. I know what it costs you, even when you don't show it. The window was very cool under her palm. You are not a burden, she said. You are never, I know, Mom. His voice was gentle, not just dismissing her, just certain. The way people take ultra certain about things they've known a long time. I know that, but knowing it doesn't change is the other thing. I know what it costs, and I didn't want that. Not for something that happened to me. She didn't respond to that. Because he wasn't wrong. And because right now, standing at this window with Ose sorting papers 8 feet behind her, she was feeling the accumulated weight of the last 18 hours in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel while she was inside them. The holding room bench, the handcuffs, the too tight pressure on her left wrist, Rankin's laugh at the water fountain, Shaw at midnight, looking at her through glass like she was something to be assessed. Her son, 5 months ago. Sitting in a car in his uniform for 4 hours and 20 minutes. She had come to Hargrove to document a pattern. The pattern had a face now. It had her son Sum's face. Elias, she said. Yeah. Is there anything on your military record from that stop? No. They didn't file anything. Didn't take my information down officially. A pause. I think they figured out partway through that I was actually active duty, that I wasn't just wearing it. But they didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They just said, go ahead. All right, Mom, yeah. Are you okay? She turned away from the window, looked at the room, Osi working steadily. Greer at the far end of the table, with his pencil moving across a stack of logs, the box of printed records in the center of the table, the ordinary materials of extraordinary work. "I'm fine," she said, which was true in the ways that mattered for right now. She hung up, stood at the window for 30 more seconds, not thinking about anything specific, just letting herself be a person who had just heard something hard, before she had to go back to being the person who knew what to do next. 30 seconds. Then she turned around, picked up the next stack of logs, and got back to work. She didn't tell Osi about Elias. Not yet. Not because she didn't trust her. She trusted Osi with most things that mattered and had for 11 years. But right now, the information didn't change what they needed to do in the next 3 hours, and she didn't have enough room inside herself to explain properly and keep working at the pace the morning required. She would tell her later, when it was relevant to something other than Naomi's own interior. Right now it was relevant only to Naomi, and she knew how to carry things that were only relevant to herself. Dunbar came back at 8:40 with 4 breakfast sandwiches from somewhere nearby, and the information that Stoker had arrived downstairs 20 minutes ago and had immediately asked to speak with Douglas Fane privately. "Let him," Naomi said. Dunbar looked at her. "Stoker going to Fane right now is what we want," she said. "It means he's trying to map his options. A man who is certain of his position doesn't spend his morning mapping options, and if Fane tells him to stonewall everything, then we proceed without his cooperation, and we do fine without it." She picked up one of the sandwiches. "But I don't think that's what happens." "Why not?" She thought about how to say it accurately. About the file sheets on Stoker at 5 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. About the person he appeared to have been before Gerald Shaw found a use for him. About the specific quality of silence he'd had when she put that plea form in front of him last night, and he'd waited for her to look at it, and she hadn't. "Because he's exhausted," she said. "Not tired. Exhausted. 10 years of carrying something that wasn't originally his to carry. People in such situations reach a point where the weight of continuing is larger than the fear of stopping. Stoker passed that point a while ago. He just needed a direction." Dunbar thought about this. "And Fane. Fane is a problem we address when it becomes one," she said. "Right now, the problem is the evidentiary session at 11 and making sure what we present is airtight." They worked through the rest of the morning with the focused quiet of people who understood what the next few hours required. Greer moved through the printed logs with methodical precision, flagging entries that showed the clearest pattern deviations. Osai built a comparative data set from the flagged entries against the city's own traffic monitoring records. Dunbar went through the intact portion of the USB-D data and wrote out from memory everything he could reconstruct from the portions that had been destroyed. Naomi read everything as it came together, asking questions where the logic needed tightening, setting aside what was useful and what was redundant. The same process she had applied to operational planning for 30 years, applied now to a different kind of operation, with different stakes but the same fundamental requirement: clarity. She went to find Stoker at 9:20. He was in a small room on the first floor that wasn't his office, just an unlocked, empty space with a table and 2 chairs. He was sitting with both hands wrapped around a paper cup that had gone cold a long time ago. He looked up when she came through the door. She was in her uniform, 4 stars on her shoulders, service ribbons across her chest, the accumulated visible record of 30 years. She had changed into it deliberately before coming downstairs, not to perform authority, not to overwhelm, but because she wanted him to see the complete picture of who he was talking to. Last night he had processed a woman in civilian clothes. This morning she wanted him to understand the full context of what that had meant. He looked at her, looked at the uniform, looked at the stars. Something moved across his face that was not quite any single emotion. More like several arriving at once. She sat down across from him. No file, no laptop, no documentation between them. Just 2 people and a table, and the morning light coming through one small window. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table. He looked at it. She watched the recognition come, slowly at first, then faster. The document was from 12 years ago. A use of force incident, the internal investigation that followed. The way that investigation had been closed without findings by a prosecutor named Gerald Shaw, who had been building a network of obligations, one buried file, at a time for longer than most people knew. Stoker's hands tightened around the cold cup. "Where did you get this?" he said. "It's in your departmental file," she said. "The official version, the one that was closed." A pause. "I have findings that were removed before it was closed." He looked up at her. "Those findings were supposed to be gone," she said. "I know. They weren't." He looked back at the document, at his own name on it, at the date. The room was quiet. She let it be quiet. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you could do when someone was making a decision was to fill the silence they needed to make it in. After a while, he said, "I didn't design this program. I know. I was told to implement it. I was given documentation showing it had council authority and city legal review. I was told it was compliant. And you implemented it," she said. Not an accusation. A statement of what the record showed. Yes, because Shaw had leverage. He didn't answer directly, but he didn't redirect either. He just looked at the document on the table between them. 12 years ago, you made a serious mistake," she said, "and Gerald Shaw made it disappear. And from that point forward, you belonged to him in a way that got harder to exit with every year that passed. That's what happened." He looked at the wall. "I told myself things," he said quietly, "about why the program wasn't what it looked like, about how the statistics could be explained, about how I wasn't the one designing it, so the responsibility wasn't." He stopped. "I told myself a lot of things. The people stopped at those checkpoints were real," she said. "A man named Darnell was stopped 4 times in 3 months on his way to work. He called his father from the side of the road, each time with his voice careful, because there was an officer standing close. His father is 73 years old, and he sat with cold coffee after every one of those calls." Stoker said nothing. "What you do from this point forward is your decision," she said. "I won't tell you what to choose. But if you want an attorney who is not Douglas Fane, Colonel Osase can have 3 names to you within the hour." She stood. "General," she stopped. "The complaint files," he said. "The 47 Adelchtelwick residents. They weren't just marked resolved without investigation. Some of them were altered before they were logged. The original language documenting what the residents actually reported was changed to something that read as routine." He paused. "I didn't alter them. But I know who did, and I know when, and I know there are records showing the original versions if you know where to look." She turned around. He was looking at the document again. Not at her, at the document. At the version of himself that existed on that page from 12 years ago, and the version of himself sitting in this chair right now, and whatever was or wasn't continuous between them. "I want an attorney," he said, "not Fane. I'll have names for you in 20 minutes, she said. She left. The evidentiary session began at 11:03 a.m., the largest conference room in Hargrove Central. 12 chairs, 12 people. 2 FBI field agents from the regional office who had arrived at 9:45 and set up quietly in the corner. A deputy from the state attorney general's office. Representative from the governor's office who had driven through the night and showed it only in the set of her jaw. Colonel Osee, Dunbar, Greer. A court reporter who arrived at 10:50 and assembled her equipment without comment. Shaw at one end with Fane beside him. Stoker at the side of the table with Patricia Rowe, his new attorney, who had arrived at 10:15 and spent 40 minutes with him and come out of that room knowing exactly what she was working with. Naomi stood at the front. She had done versions of this for 30 years, stood in front of rooms full of people with authority, and presented them with information they would prefer not to receive. The skill was not in the presentation. It was in staying clear, in removing everything personal from the delivery so the information could land without interference. She began. "The corridor safety ordinance went into effect in Hargrove 7 months ago," she said. "In those 7 months, this department conducted 1,143 checkpoint stops across 5 access routes between Delwood and the rest of the city." Osee placed the first stack of documents in front of each person at the table. "These are the official checkpoint logs, printed from this department's internal system, authenticated by the court reporter. Of the 1,143 stops documented, 89% involved drivers with Delwood residential addresses. Of those drivers, 91% were identified as black in the department's own demographic recording field." Fane looked up. "Demographic recording in checkpoint operations is standard practice for 86% of all stops resulted in no charge, no citation, and no documented reason for the stop beyond checkpoint location," Naomi continued, as if Fane hadn't spoken. because his objection was procedural, and she was presenting documented fact, and those two things did not need to interact yet. The FBI agents were writing. "I'm going to show you two sets of numbers side by side," she said. OC placed comparison sheets in front of each person. On the left, checkpoint stop frequency for the Kellner Avenue corridor between 7 p.m. and on Fridays, the highest volume period in the program's operational data. On the right, traffic volume data for the same corridor during the same period, taken from the city's own traffic monitoring infrastructure. She gave them time to look. Traffic volume is distributed evenly between drivers with Delwood addresses and drivers with Greenway addresses during this period. The stop rate is not. Drivers with Delwood addresses are stopped at a rate of 10-to-1 compared to drivers with Greenway addresses on the same road during the same hours. The Deputy Attorney General leaned forward. 10-to-1. 10-to-1, Naomi said. Consistent across all 5 checkpoint locations. Consistent across all 7 months of operational data. She moved to the next section, complaints suppression. Another distribution of documents. 47 formal complaints were filed by Delwood residents over 7 months. All 47 were marked resolved in the department's official system. Detective Dunbar will speak to what the resolution process actually involved. Dunbar stood. He was not a comfortable formal presenter, and he didn't perform comfort he didn't have. He stood straight and spoke precisely and laid out what he had found over 7 months of independent documentation. The complaint forms with altered language. The original versions that describe specific incidents of discriminatory treatment replaced with sanitized summaries that described actions. The badge numbers of the officers who had made the alterations, the timestamps that showed when the changes had occurred. Fain interrupted twice. Both times, Naomi said, "Please allow the witness to complete the statement." Both times, Fain stopped. When Dunbar finished, Greer took over. He walked through the printed logs date by date. His voice was quiet and careful and entirely without drama, and the effect of that was that the numbers he read were the loudest thing in the room. 1,200 stops reduced to their actual meaning. A community of people treated as suspects on their own streets for 7 months without cause and without recourse. When Greer finished, nobody spoke immediately. Shaw had not said anything since the session began. He sat with his hands folded on the table and his face arranged into the expression of a man watching something approach that he has known for some time was approaching and has been unable to stop. Fain made his argument at 12:38 p.m. It was a good argument. She gave him that without reservation. He was precise and structured, and he applied pressure to the correct legal joints. Chain of custody on the USB was compromised. The primary evidence collector had a documented history of procedural violations that raised questions about methodology. The checkpoint program operated under explicitly granted municipal authority. Statistical disparities of the kind presented could reflect variables the investigation hadn't examined. He spoke for 16 minutes without notes. When he finished, the Deputy Attorney General looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at the logs. Then she said, "Counselor, are you representing to this panel that these logs are inaccurate?" Faith said. I'm representing that for interpretation requires. Are they accurate records," she said, "of what this department did? Yes or no?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. "They are the department's official records," Fain said. "So yes," she said, "they're accurate." Then Fain turned to Dunbar, and Naomi watched it happen. The thing she had told Dunbar would happen. Fain went through it methodically. The procedural violations from 3 years ago, the improper record access charge, the disciplinary hearing, the specific ways Dunbar had bent protocol during his independent documentation over the past 7 months. He had clearly spent the night preparing, and he deployed it cleanly and without visible satisfaction, which made it worse somehow than if he'd seemed pleased. When Fain finished, the room looked at Dunbar. Dunbar stood up. "Everything counsel just described is accurate," he said. The room stilled. "Every procedural violation, every corner I cut, every time I didn't follow the exact protocol I was supposed to follow, all of it is accurate." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you I did everything right. I didn't." He reached into the folder in front of him and placed a stack of documents on the table. "This is 7 months of independent documentation. Stop frequencies, demographics, outcomes, cross-referenced against city traffic data. collected imperfectly by a person with an imperfect record. He looked at the panel. The data doesn't have a disciplinary file. The data doesn't have a history. The data shows what it shows, regardless of who collected it. And what it shows is 1,143 stops, 89% of which targeted residents of one neighborhood, 86% of which resulted in nothing. He sat back down. The room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. The session recessed at 1:12 p.m. Shaw requested a private meeting with Naomi at 1:48. She agreed in under 10 seconds, because she had been expecting this request since 4 in the morning and she was ready for it. They met in the hallway outside the conference room rather than inside it. Her choice. 4 walls and a closed door created a specific kind of pressure that she wanted him to feel the absence of right now. She wanted him to feel like he was choosing to talk, like he still had options, because she needed him to believe that long enough to say what he was going to say. He stood with his back to the wall. His suit was still pressed, but something in how he wore it had changed. The armor was the same. The person inside it was different from the one who had walked in last night. "I want to make a proffer," he said, "a formal one, but I wanted to tell you first." "I'm not a prosecutor," she said. "Anything you offer needs to go to the federal." "I know that," he said. "I've known that since this morning. I wanted to tell you before I told them. Because you're the one who came here. You're the one who sat in that holding room last night." He looked at her. "I wanted you to hear it first." She waited. "I didn't conceive this program," he said. "I didn't bring it to the table. It was brought to me." He looked down the hallway, at nothing in particular. 18 months ago, I was approached by a representative of Hargrove Capital Group. They had a development plan for Delwood, large scale. The kind of project that generates significant tax revenue and significant private profit for the people behind it. He paused. They needed the neighborhood to be available. They needed current residents to have reason to consider leaving. The hallway was quiet. And they needed someone to create that reason, Naomi said. They needed someone with municipal authority to design a program that would make staying in Delwood feel like the harder choice. Checkpoints, stops, the daily friction of being treated like a suspect on your own street, not dramatic enough to make national news, just persistent enough to make people tired. Tired enough to sell, she said, tired enough to consider it. Tired enough that a developer offering below market purchase prices starts to sound like relief instead of exploitation. He paused. That was the mechanism. She looked at him. "And you agreed to build the mechanism." He didn't answer immediately. "They financed my last campaign," he said. Hargrove Capital Group, through 3 subsidiary organizations, so it didn't appear in one place in the filings. $1.4 million across a 14-month period. He stopped. "I knew that if I didn't cooperate, the money would go to whoever ran against me, and someone else would do exactly what they wanted anyway. So I told myself." "You told yourself it was something other than what it was," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did, for a long time." The hallway was quiet for a moment. "The name," she said, "the specific person at Hargrove Capital Group, the one who made the approach." He met her eyes. "If I give you that," he said, "I need this conversation and everything that comes after it to be part of a formal proffer with the federal prosecutors. I need my cooperation documented before I say anything more." "I will tell the federal prosecutors that you initiated this conversation," she said, "that you came to me before being asked, that you provided information voluntarily before any formal agreement was in place. That is what I can offer. The rest of the arrangement is between you and them." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "Terrence Alcott. He operates through a holding company called Summit Ridge Partners. The development proposal, the campaign financing, the approach to me, all of it runs through Summit Ridge." He paused. "Alcott has done this in 4 other cities over the last decade. Different program names, different municipal partners, same structure. Delwood would have been the 5th. Naomi wrote the name in her notebook slowly. "Terrence Alcott, Summit Ridge Partners. Documentation," she said. "Emails between me and Alcott's representative going back 18 months. I've maintained them on an independent server outside Sissy. His voice was steady, tired but steady. "I kept them because I'm not naive. I kept them because I understood from the beginning that if this ever collapsed, I would need to be able to show I wasn't the architect. Your attorney can provide access." "Patricia Rowe." "Yes." He paused, not Fain. She looked at him. You understood from the beginning that this might collapse, she said. I hoped it wouldn't. But I'm not a person operates without a contingency. She closed her notebook. I'll notify the federal prosecutors that you have a voluntary proffer to make, she said. I'll tell them it came before they asked for it. She turned to walk back toward the conference room. General Cole. She stopped. I'm sorry, he said, for what happened to you last night, and for what has been happening in Delwood for 7 months. I know those words don't. No, she said, they don't. She walked back into the conference room. She went to Delwood at 4:15 in the afternoon. No official reason, no file to deliver. She drove there alone in the rental car with the windows down because the afternoon had turned warm and clear in the way that southern afternoons sometimes do after a gray morning, like the day had decided to try again. She parked on the same block she'd parked on the day before. Walked 2 blocks. The oak trees on Zelwood's Main Street were in full leaf, and the shadows underneath them moved with the wind in the particular way of shadows under old trees complicated and alive. She found Elroy Sims on his porch. Same chair. Same posture of a man who had been sitting in that chair, watching that street for a very long time. A coffee cup on the railing beside him that had probably been hot 2 hours ago. He looked up when she came up the front path. He didn't recognize her. She was in civilian clothes again, and they had never met. Mr. Sims, she said, my name is Naomi Cole. I work with the Department of Defense. She paused. I'd like to talk with you about your son, if you're willing. He looked at her for a moment. Darnell, he said. Yes, sir. He looked at the street, back at her. Sit down, he said. She sat on the porch, not in a chair, on the steps, a level below him, which felt like the right position for what she was there to do. She told him what she could tell him at this point. The checkpoint program was being shut down effective immediately. All stops made under the Corridor Safety Ordinance would be reviewed by an independent federal panel. The 47 complaints marked resolved without investigation would be reopened and addressed. Darnell's 4 stops would be reviewed, any impact on his record corrected, any documentation those stops expunged from systems that shouldn't contain them. Elroy listened to all of it without speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. He looked at his coffee cup on the railing, at the street, at his hands. You know what Darnell does? He said. No, sir, drives a delivery truck. Has since he was 19, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when they need coverage. He likes the work, likes being out in the city, seeing different parts of it. He paused. Used to take the long way home, sometimes just because he felt like it. Take routes that didn't make sense, time-wise, but went past things he liked to look at. Naomi listened. After the second time they stopped him, he stopped doing that, Elroy said. Takes the direct route now, gets home and stays in. He looked at his hands. They didn't just stop him on a road. They took something from him that belongs to him. The simple thing of moving through the city he grew up in without thinking twice about it. He stopped. The street was quiet in the afternoon. The worst part, he said, and his voice changed, got quieter. The way voices get when they are carrying the actual weight of something rather than the idea of it. The worst part isn't what they did to him, it's what it did to him. Inside, he used to call me after work just to talk. Now he calls to say he's home, like checking in is the thing, like the destination is the accomplishment. Nay sat on the steps and did not look away. I don't know how you give that back, he said. Whatever paper you fix, whatever record you clear. I don't know how you give back the part of him that stopped expecting the street to be safe. She sat with that. Let it be what it was without trying to answer it or soften it. Then she said, I don't know either. I don't think there's a way to return exactly what was taken. The record can be corrected. The program is ending. But what it did to people while it ran, she paused, that's a different kind of dead. Elroy nodded slowly. I have a son, she said. He's 26. He's a sergeant. He drove through Hargrove 5 months ago on his way to see me. He was in uniform. She stopped. They held him at Kellner for 4 hours. Elroy looked at her. He didn't tell me, she said. He didn't want me to worry. They sat in the quiet for a moment. A car went past slowly. A neighbor walked by on the sidewalk, glanced up, kept walking. The ordinary afternoon texture of a street. Mine didn't tell me the 4th time, Elroy said quietly. I found out from a neighbor who saw it happen. Darnell hadn't said a word. I asked him why, and he said he didn't want me upset. He looked at the porch railing. They always think that's how they take care of us, by not saying, by carrying it alone so we don't have to. Yes, she said. But it's heavy, he said. Carrying something like that without telling anyone. Heavier than it needs to be. Yes, she said again. They sat up in the afternoon light, not filling the silence. Just sitting in it together the way people sometimes can when they have arrived at the same place from different directions. After a while, Elroy said, "Is it really finished? The checkpoints?" "Yes," she said. "And Darnell's record will be protected. I'll follow it personally until it's done." He picked up the coffee cup from the railing, looked at it, set it back down. "You want a fresh cup?" he asked. She had things to do, documents to review, a briefing call with Washington at 6. The afternoon was moving. "I'd appreciate that," she said. He went inside. She sat on the steps and looked at the street, at the oak trees and the grocery store visible at the end of the block and the church on the corner, at the ordinary living of a neighborhood that had been here long before anyone put up checkpoint signs and would be here long after. No signs now. She hadn't noticed the absence until this moment. It's the street without them. Just a street. Just houses and trees and people moving through an afternoon in the place they lived. She sat on Elroy Sims's porch steps and let herself notice it. Dunbar was in the parking lot of Hargrove Central when she got back at 5:40, standing by his car, jacket on, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man who had made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. She walked up. "The FGI position," he said. "They're serious," she said. "I spoke to the field agent this afternoon. They want someone who knows this region, who understands how programs like this are built and sustained inside a department. I'd have to relocate. Most likely." He looked at his car, at the station building, at the parking lot, where he'd spent portions of the last 7 sitting in the dark with a notebook. "My brother," he said. "He's a surgeon, pediatric. He drove through Kilner 8 months ago. He called me from the side of the road." He paused. He was in his hospital clothes. They held him for 3 hours. When they let him go, they didn't explain and didn't apologize. He looked at the building. He asked me if I could do anything. I told him I was working on it. "And you were," she said. "I called this morning," Dunbar said. "Told him what happened here. Told him about the program ending and the reviews starting." A pause. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's about time." Then he asked what I was going to do next. "What did you tell him?" Dunbar looked at her. "I told him I was going to keep working on it," he said, "just from a different position." She nodded. "You did something hard for a long time without knowing if it would matter," she said. 7 months of documentation in a building that was actively working against what you were doing. That's not a small thing. Most people don't do that." He looked at the ground for a moment. "I had a clear picture," he said. "The data was obvious from the beginning. But until last night, it was still numbers on paper. Then I watched them process you through booking, and it stopped being numbers." "Yes," she said, "that's how it works." They stood in the parking lot in the late afternoon. "What happens to Shaw?" he asked. "Federal prosecution. The proffer will count in his favor, but it won't eliminate the charges. Violations, abuse of power, campaign finance, irregularities at minimum. And the information about Alcott and Summit Ridge Partners opens a separate federal investigation that goes well beyond Hargrove." Stoker cooperated fully. His attorney negotiated this afternoon. He'll lose his position. Sentencing will depend on the scope of cooperation and the judge. She paused. "The officers who altered the complaint records face separate criminal charges. Fain represented his client within his professional role. Whether the way he used what he knew about you crosses an ethical line is a bar association question, not a federal one." Dunbar nodded at each answer, taking inventory. "And Greer," he said. She thought about Greer, his organized desk, his printed logs, the complaint code written in the corner of her intake form without instruction or acknowledgement. "Greer is going to be fine," she said. "Better than fine." Dunbar looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for coming here, for doing it the way you did." She looked at him. "Thank you for sending in this report 7 months ago," she said, "when you didn't know if it would go anywhere. That's where this started." He nodded once. She walked back inside. She drove to the airport the next morning at 6:50. Dunbar drove her, the way he'd done things throughout this work, without being asked, because it was the thing that needed doing, and he was the available person to do it. The city was waking up. Traffic was light. The route from Hargrove Central to the airport took them along the edge of Delwood. Dunbar took it without being told to, maybe because it was the more direct route. Maybe because he wanted to drive past it one more time in a different context than the one he'd been driving past it in for months. Kellner Avenue. The checkpoint barriers were gone. The command vehicle that had sat at the far end of the block every evening for 7 months was gone. What remained was a road, a 4-lane road on a Wednesday morning, with regular traffic moving in both directions. Unremarkable, ordinary, exactly what it should have been all along. She watched it pass through the window. Neither of them said anything about it. Dunbar kept his eyes on the road. Naomi kept hers on the street, and they passed through what had been a checkpoint and was just a plus on a map, and then it was behind them. "What's?" he asked. "Alcott," she said. Summit Ridge?" "The other 4 cities. That investigation is federal, and it'll take time to build properly. My role was always Hargrove. I'll brief everything we have, and then the next phase runs without me. Does that ever bother you? Not being there for how it ends?" She thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," she said. "But the ending isn't the point I was built for. I was built for the part where nothing is moving yet and someone has to go in and make it move." She looked out the window at the city passing by. "The movement continues after I leave. That's enough." He drove for a moment without speaking. "Hargrove Capital Group," he said. "You mentioned the federal investigation might need people who know the regional landscape." "It will," she said. "Yes." He nodded, not committing out loud to anything, but nodding in a way that meant he had already committed internally, and was simply letting the decision settle. The airport came into view ahead. Morning sun hitting the terminal glass and throwing light back across the road in long angles. Dunbar pulled up to departures, put the car in Paul Park. The engine ran quietly. They sat for a moment. "My brother asked me something else this morning," Dunbar said. She looked at him. "He asked if I was okay, and I didn't know what to say. I never know what to say when people ask me that." He looked at the steering wheel. "I told him I thought so." He said, "Good." He said, "Call me when you get somewhere new so I know where you are." Naomi looked at him for a moment. "That's a good brother," she said. "Yeah," Dunbar said, "he is." She got out of the car, picked up her bag from the back seat, stood by the open door for a moment. "Detective Dunbar." He looked at her. "The report you filed 7 months ago," she said. 40 pages, by the book, through proper channels, knowing it might go nowhere and sending it anyway. She paused. "That's what started all of this, not me, you." He didn't respond immediately. She closed the door, walked through the departures entrance, didn't look back. In Delwood, the morning was already underway. Elroy Sims had been up since 5:30, made fresh coffee, stood at the front window while it brewed, and watched the street come into the morning the way he had watched it come into mornings for 30 years. The oak tree in the front yard, the grocery store at the end of the block starting to show light in the window, the church on the corner standing the way it had always stood. His phone rang at 6:15. He picked up. "Daddy." Darnell's voice. Different this morning. Not careful. Just his son's voice, easy and ordinary, calling the way he used to call before all of this. "Thought I'd check in before my route." "You eat something?" Elroy said. "I'll grab something on the road." "That's not eating something." "Daddy, I'm just saying." Darnell laughed, short and real. The laugh Elroy had been waiting to hear for 3 months without knowing that was what he was waiting for. "I'm taking the long way in today," Darnell said. "Down by the river. Haven't done that in a while." Elroy stood at his front window with his coffee. "That sounds good, son," he said. "Yeah," Darnell said. "It does." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. The way people talk when the important thing is just the talking itself. Then Darnell said he had to get moving, and Elroy said all right, and they hung up. Elroy stood at the window, watched the street. No barriers on the road, no flashing lights at the corner, no signs counting down to the place where you had to prove you belonged in your own neighborhood. Just the street. Just the morning. Just the ordinary Wednesday, the place that had been here before any of this and would be here after. He drank his coffee while it was still hot and waited for nothing in particular, which was exactly the way a morning was supposed to feel.